Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's presentation called I See That Breach Everywhere. In today's presentation, we'll discuss how to build a successful mobile device management program to help your organization successfully launch and manage MDM. From a logistics perspective, everyone will be muted until we get to the Q&A section at the end, so please make note of any questions you have along the way, and we'll make sure we have time to answer them at the end. We'll cover a number of topics today, including the importance of a risk assessment, an approach you can follow to develop your program, and we'll wrap up with some Q&A. We know that your time is limited, and we'll make sure we keep it short. However, please feel free to ask questions at the end, or you can reach out to me individually after the webinar to discuss the topics that we covered today. From an introduction perspective, I'm Mike Rubish, the Director of Information Security and Risk Solutions at Ncompass. I've been in IT for about 18 years, with the last 13 really focused on security and risk. I spent time both as a consultant and as a practitioner on the corporate side of things. So who is Ncompass? Ncompass was established in 2000 and has provided consulting services that focus on the data center design and related components. Services such as data center design, strategy, relocation planning and implementation, cloud strategy, and a more recent focus on information security and risk. Over the course of 13 years, we've developed solutions and services that have led us to one common theme. At their core, they contribute to an organization's competitive advantage by strategically aligning IT with business priorities and goals. We call it the power of strategic IT. The maturity of our services has resulted in an established approach developed internally by Ncompass experts. Most people think of us as just data center experts, which we are. However, this approach really establishes us as an authority in aligning IT with business. Everyone in IT has read about the transformation of IT. We have actually developed an approach that helps you do it. An effective approach to developing an MDM program begins with a risk assessment. This risk assessment should assess, evaluate, manage, and measure security risks associated with MDM. It is very important that you work with both the business and IT to understand the mobile requirements. Understanding these requirements is absolutely necessary, and by identifying them through the risk assessment process, you can begin to formally document these as part of your program charter. Things like, why does the business want this, and how can IT provide it securely, are extremely important to identify. While it may seem easy to gloss over requirements, it really is a critical piece of a project success. Too often, I've seen an organization purchase a product because it's the right thing to do or because everyone else is doing it. I actually saw a company that spent north of $75,000 to buy a security event management solution. When they made the purchase, they knew they would need it for compliance, but they didn't get any real business requirements before jumping into the purchase. The equipment was bought on a fire sale at a deeply discounted price, and they thought it was a great deal. Fast forward 2 years, and keep in mind it was 2 years of maintenance at $15,000 a year, and they still hadn't implemented the product. It was racked, powered, and running, but it never got configured, and it was never used. The lack of requirements drove the priority of that project down, and it ended up being wasted money. At the same time, the business was making requests that were tough to fulfill. Things like, what was a specific user doing at this time? Or who used admin rights on a specific date to make changes? Instead of a properly running security event management product, they were manually digging through logs. All of this operational expense and the initial capital expense were incurred because they didn't take the time to understand what the business needed and how they could fulfill those requests. So for the sake of driving the point home, I'll say it again, requirements gathering is critical. As you're performing the risk assessment, keep in mind risks that need to be addressed, either through risk avoidance, acceptance, transference, or mitigation. Things like mobile device physical access, the type of attacks that may occur on those devices, or the applications the device use, malicious applications and code, securing the traffic appropriately, and data sensitivity and data loss. Speaking of securing the traffic, did anyone see the recent iOS vulnerability and patch that was approving SSL certificates, even if they were fake, due to a single repeated line of code? First, get your devices patched. Second, think about not only how you will secure the traffic at your organization, but how do the devices secure the traffic? And will you be able to patch quickly and efficiently when something like this occurs? Finally, as part of the risk assessment, you need to understand the scope and motivations behind the project. Some of the key questions that need to be answered are how many devices and what type of devices will be included in the program. Will they be owned and managed by your organization, or are you going for more of a bring your own device aspect? Or perhaps a mix based on tiering you may set up for different types of employees. How are the devices going to connect to your network, and where will they be connecting from? What type of data will they access? Will it be sensitive data? And how will access to that data be controlled? What protection can you offer? Maybe things like encryption or DLP or endpoint antivirus. What are the requirements around the management of the solution? Is cloud acceptable? It's sure easier to set up and deploy, but many organizations don't want to lose that control. They'd prefer local management. And how will you define your tiering levels for employee access? Oftentimes executives need access to different information that other employees might not. These are just a subset of all the questions that need to be answered as part of the risk assessment. But this isn't wasted effort just to find out where your risk lies and what you can do about it. While you use the data to make a determination on the risk, you also use the answers when looking for a product that fits your requirement. Now it's time to assess all the other aspects. Do you have staff that can operate an MDM solution? A skills matrix might be a useful tool to understand what gaps you have. You'll need to review your policy as well. Most people think of the overall security policy, but you'll also need to create an acceptable use policy for mobile devices. And what about the destruction of data policy? Will you wipe the phone if it's lost or the employee leaves the organization? And keep in mind that you'll need some language from legal in the policy, something to the effect of users must provide access to personally owned devices if they become part of a workplace investigation or if they become subject to a legal hold in a civil litigation case. You may also need different policies based on the global reach of your organization. European data privacy laws drastically differ from the US, and you'll need to align with those as well, just for an example. You'll want to look at your existing processes that you can reuse for MDM. You'll adjust those processes to be specific to the platform, but you should have repeatable processes that can stretch across multiple technologies. An incident response process is an example of that. You'll need to know how to respond when there are issues. Finally, you want to start building out your product comparison worksheet. If you haven't done one of these before, it's typically a weighted matrix of all of your requirements or your need-to-haves, along with your want-to-haves and your nice-to-haves. When working through an RFP or just evaluating products, you can weight how the products handle these requirements to develop a score-based system. This really boils up the top 1 to 2 products that fit your requirements the best. There are a ton of MDM products out there, and each one does things differently. This is a great way to weed through a lot of the noise. Once you've identified your top couple products, you can move on to performing a proof of concept to see how it works in your environment. Out of all these assessments, you should be able to develop a high-level project plan that includes capital and operational budgets, project or technology dependencies, and task and project priority. This is also the appropriate time to develop a communication plan. Anytime you have a project that affects end users, you want to notify them of changes and benefits at the appropriate time. Now's the time to develop and deploy. Create your detailed project plans and run the project as appropriate for your organization. Some have PMOs, some have project managers that do it individually, and sometimes you do that yourself. From a staffing perspective, you'll likely need to either hire staff or train the existing staff to get the right skills in place ahead of time. Adding the new policies we talked about and modifying those processes that you identified as gaps in the assess phase will need to happen. Get the product through a proof of concept and get it implemented correctly. I would recommend getting outside help for the installation, like professional services, to ensure it is configured correctly for your environment. This is also a great time to start executing the communication plan by letting users know what's coming. It might be a good idea to have a test group of power users that you can work with in a phased rollout, and they would need to know what they're expected to do once the implementation is complete. So what next? Well, turn it on and hope for the best. No, just kidding. As we move into operations, We need to carefully monitor the environment to make sure everything is working as expected. Operational runbooks should be developed to manage daily, weekly, and monthly type tasks. We need to test the processes we've developed and modify them as appropriate. But this shouldn't occur just once. This should be an iterative process to continually improve and update those processes. This is also the time to test our incident response and exception handling. We also need to fully integrate the MDM program and technology into the rest of security operation. This is often a forgotten about piece. Things like gathering the correct logs and getting them to your logging solution, and getting the MDM solution set up to be part of the vulnerability and patch management program are critical. If you ran a phased rollout or a test group with power users, it's time to move on to a larger rollout to employees that need the access. Keep in mind that you need to clearly and frequently communicate with what the employees should expect and what to do when it doesn't behave the way they thought it would. Establishing those expectations will go a long way in employee satisfaction with the project. Now that we're successfully operating, we need to determine if we're actually successful. Different metrics should be gathering the appropriate data. Metrics that are appropriate for your organization need to be developed, tracked, and reported. Some ideas might be usage metrics. How are the mobile devices being used? How much data is moving through the system? What metrics will you need to gather to show the system is in compliance? And are we finding employees are working longer hours because of the availability? Maybe budget metrics make sense if you're managing the devices. What's the spend on the devices, data plans, etc. This can show past spend and help justify future spend. But you shouldn't create metrics just for the sake of creating metrics. Good metrics will speed the decision-making process and assist in making better informed decisions. But what do we do with those in the end? Who gets the reports? And what kinds of decisions can they or will they make based on the data and reports? All excellent questions that need to be answered, but are key to having successful metrics and reporting. While we focus specifically on an MDM solution within this presentation, it's a proven approach that will work with nearly any IT project. Perform a risk assessment, then assess, develop, deploy, operate, and measure. I urge you to keep that in mind as you implement new products, as it will greatly affect the chance of success. That brings us to the end of the presentation. I know we covered quite a bit in a very short amount of time, and it was fairly high level. But I'd love to answer any questions you have, and if you'd like more detailed information about anything from developing a skills matrix to performing a product evaluation, I'd be more than happy to answer questions or set up time to talk with you at a later time. With that being said, we'll unmute the lines, and what questions do you have for me? Okay, that will conclude our webinar. On February 27th, Mike Lutgen will present I Go Where I Want Breach, which will focus on the technology behind MDM, mobile device management. If you're looking at implementing MDM, you'll want to listen in and ask questions with Mike. Thank you for your time and attendance. If you should have any questions or feedback after the webinar is closed, I've got my contact information on the screen, and feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.